Hey, aloha, folks, and welcome to this latest edition of Five Questions, segment that appears here on the Rick Hamada program in the morning and also on the front page of HawaiiReporter.com. You know, recently there was a case adjudicated in the Hawaii Supreme Court that has a remarkable amount of impact on us in our community. To help us understand all of this, we're delighted to welcome on board Mr. Robert Thomas. He with the Damon Key law firm here in Honolulu. And first of all, Robert, thanks so very much for being with us. How you doing?
Oh, very good this morning. Thank you for having me on, Rick.
Good. Well, listen, this is one heck of a story, and many people know the film, of course, The Descendants, but this is a real-life version and has a net effect on rail and other projects as well. Can we start at the very beginning, though? Robert, would you mind with question number one, telling us a little bit about yourself and setting the stage for this particular case?
Sure. I'm a lawyer in private practice in Honolulu, and I had an interest in this case not because I'm representing any party in it, but primarily because I'm a citizen and taxpayer of the city, and was very concerned with how the rail issue played out and how it's playing out both in the federal courts and in this case in the state court. So I took an hour or two, went down last Thursday, and listened to the arguments in the Hawaii Supreme Court in which descendants of Native Hawaiians who allegedly are buried in the Kaka'ako area are challenging the environmental studies that were done for the rail project, which of course is starting to be built out on the Kapolei side and is working its way towards town.
You know, it's an amazing story, and the reason why is the rail project in and of itself is without a doubt the most expensive project that has ever been proposed for the city and county of Honolulu. But there's just so many ebbs and flows with this project that both detractors and supporters, it's kind of commingled into this big batch. If we look at the very basic elements of the Kalekini v. Yoshioka case, it is termed here in a headline in a column that you had authored that the rail project is in grave danger. Can you help us with question number two, kind of expand on that for us?
Sure. I mean, under Hawaii law, and you mentioned, this is, I kind of joke that this is the real-life descendants.
Yeah.
Because Hawaii law gives any descendants of people who, what we call the iwi kupuna, the Native Hawaiian burials, gives their descendants standing to challenge the sufficiency of archaeological surveys, much in the same way that, we saw environmental challenges to the super ferry project. So this is the real-life descendants because you have descendants of folks who were buried in Kaka'ako challenging the project. And what they're saying was essentially that the state and the city couldn't phase the project and do the environmental review in phases. So in other words, before they dug the first shovelful of dirt out in Kapolei, that they had to both study and take into account Native Hawaiian burials that they might find in Kaka'ako 20 miles away and probably years later in the construction. The city and state are arguing that they have the discretion to decide to do this in segmented or in phases and decide upon, do the archaeological surveys as they don't have to wait, in other words, to dig the first shovelful of dirt, but they can start digging and start construction out Kapolei side, and then as they get closer to town, finish up those archaeological studies and make accommodations for any burials they find once they get closer to town.
And as far as, and I'll go to question number three here, what was the position of the state attorney general or deputy state attorney general in trying to justify this?
Yeah, I mean, the city took the lead. They had each side gets half an hour of argument, and the city and the state split their half an hour, roughly, I would say, 2/3 to 1/3. So the state actually took sort of a secondary role, and it was the city's attorney, actually a private attorney that the city has hired to argue the case, who took sort of the lead. And the state's attorney, I think their positions are quite consistent. They both took the position that their agencies have the discretion under state law, much like federal agencies have the discretion under federal burials and archaeological law to segment the project and do the studies in phases. And the argument of the plaintiffs, Ms. Kalekini and the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, was that they couldn't do it in phases, that Hawaii law is different than federal law, and that they have to do it as consider it as one large project.
You know, whenever we take a case like this, and we're talking with Mr. Robert Thomas, of course, with this edition of 5 Questions of the Damon Key Law Firm, but as a concerned citizen first and foremost, you know, when we watch these play out, it's interesting to find out what the conversations are, the questions that are being asked, and answered not only by counsel but also by the judges. A little bit unique composition of the court that's hearing this case, isn't it?
Yes, it was. Normally, I mean, the Hawaii Supreme Court is 5 justices, and for reasons unexplained to the public, 2 of the justices, Justice Akoba and Justice Duffy, recused themselves. In other words, took themselves off from hearing the case, and so under the procedures the court employs, instead of leaving 2 vacancies, they filled them with circuit judges. And so they brought up 2 circuit judges, Judge Browning and Judge To'oto'o, to sit and hear the case and make the decision. So we'll have a decision made by 3 Supreme Court justices, the Chief, Justice Rechtenwald, Justice McKenna, and Justice Nakayama, as well as 2 judges sitting by designation, which is fairly unusual. And it changed sort of the tenor of the arguments, I think, because Justice Akoba in particular is normally a very active questioner, and you really can't tell from his questions which way he's leaning. He will often go, make very aggressive questioning of a side or of a lawyer whose position he ultimately supports, and in order to test out that argument. Mm-hmm. But in this case, he wasn't sitting, even though he had, I think, some very active questioners among the remaining justices. But it really did sort of change the tone and tenor of the argument itself.
We're talking with, of course, attorney at law Robert Thomas. When you heard, and again, I know that with question number 4, we never like to speculate, but sometimes you can, based on the conversations, based on the Q&A, based on the questions from the bench, and those sitting on the bench. What's your opinion of where this case will go?
Yeah, let me start this off by saying it's always risky to predict based on oral arguments how a court will rule. But having said that, I'll go ahead and do it because I think in this case, and the reason I chose that sort of bad pun about the rail project being in grave danger is I was convinced that after this hearing that at least 3 of the jurists sitting on the panel that day seemed quite likely to say that to reject the city and the state's position and seem very skeptical, let's put it that way, of the position that the government can segment the project up and then decide to do the archaeological review in phases. But what they didn't really address, I thought, and it perhaps maybe the more interesting question is if the court says that the city and state couldn't do that, given that they've already started to do that, what next? Are they going to shut the project down as the plaintiffs requested? Are they going to say, well, you goofed and didn't follow the law correctly, but we're going to give you some time to do a supplemental archaeological review, those sort of things. So the very interesting question of what remedy the court will impose if it does decide to say that the city and state violated the law really wasn't addressed at all. So I think that's the more fascinating issue.
Wow. Final question, again, Robert, and I would like to kind of turn it over to yourself, is that, again, when we contemplate hearings before the Supreme Court, first of all, when the decision is rendered either way, can there be an appeal? If so, to where? And if not, if this becomes the law of the land, especially if the plaintiffs prevail, what type of time frame are we looking at for that decision to be implemented?
First of all, this is a matter purely of state law for the most part, and so it is any decision that the Supreme Court of Hawaii renders will be unless they sort of go off in a different direction, about 99.9% unreviewable by the U.S. Supreme Court or any other court. So the Hawaii Supreme Court has the final say on matters of Hawaii law, and the petitioners have phrased their case as one purely of the application of Hawaii statutes and Hawaii regulations. So it's very unlikely, whichever way the court decides this, that there will be any kind of further review by a federal court. As to timing, I was sort of half expecting a quick decision along the lines of the Super Ferry case, where the court heard arguments in the morning and then by that afternoon had issued a preliminary decision. But the court these days, the Hawaii Supreme Court, is operating on a fairly fast timeline. So even at the sort of the outside, I would expect a decision in this case within the next couple of months. And I actually sort of predict one sooner than that because I think the court is aware that, construction is underway. This is a highly visible and a project that's become probably the key issue in the mayor's race. How would that affect Governor Cayetano's run at the mayor's race if the court shuts down the project? His sole platform, it seems, is or one of his major platforms is to shut down the rail project, and what would happen there? So the court, is not guided by those concerns, but surely is aware that the public is immensely interested in the issue. So I think it would have a decision for us sooner than later. But really, the outside window, if it took its usual time, it would probably issue a decision within a couple of months. So they're very quick these days on that sort of thing.
I just for a point of clarification before we go, Robert, if you wouldn't mind, if the plaintiff does prevail in this case, in your estimation, would this lead to the end of the rail project as we know it?
I don't think so. The plaintiffs have asked for an immediate shutdown of the project until such time as proper archaeological reviews are undertaken. I don't think that will happen. The court, is not going to inject itself, I think, into that issue. It will rule whichever way on the law, and if it rules that the city and state shouldn't have done this, my best guess is that the court will say, well, we've got some time because the city and state have both said it's not going to. The project, of course, isn't knocking on Kaka'ako's doorstep today. And order a supplemental archaeological review to be undertaken, and then so the court to maintain jurisdiction to make sure that they do it properly and before such time as the project does reach Kaka'ako. But then again, you take a look at Super Ferry, and there were some of those same concerns there that they were already operating without much apparent environmental damage, and yet the court ordered them to stop and go do a supplemental, but they couldn't continue while that was ongoing. So, it's anyone's guess on that one, although my best guess is that regardless of what they do, they'll let the project continue forward.
It's been a great conversation. We appreciate you joining us for our friends dialed into 5 Questions today here on KHVH Radio and also HawaiiReporter.com. Robert, if somebody would like to correspond with you via email, what's the best way they could do so?
Sure. We have a very simple website and email address. It's my initials, RHT@HawaiiLawyer.com.
Perfect. Well, thanks so very much again. We really appreciate it. Hope we can do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I appreciate the opportunity, and, any time for you.
All righty. Thanks so much, Robert. Aloha to you.
Okay. All right. Aloha, Rick. Bye-bye.
Mr. Robert Thomas joining us, attorney at law with Damon Key, and insight on a very important recent Hawaii Supreme Court case that has really a great impact on the rail conversation. Thanks so very much for joining us this edition of 5 Questions. My name is Rick Hamada, and we'll see you again soon.